How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the next stream in which we're going to tackle some of the most asked questions in our industry on the popular industrial automation and manufacturing channels. The first comment comes from the username by Integral, and the user says, watching Odyssey the way Nolan intended. And Prime Cinematic Experience, again, he's referencing, if you haven't seen this, I personally have an S7 1500 series PLC sitting behind me. So for those who are unfamiliar, the comment he is making is that, of course, there is a screen onto which you can put an image. And again, this is used for different purposes. You can use it for troubleshooting. You can use it for set points. Obviously, it's not currently powered on, but you can change the IP address of the device. But you can also add your own, usually people add their company logos or funny memes and or interesting images. And so this user, of course, if you're referencing the movie that has been released recently, it was shot in 4K, or there's even a higher resolution than 4K. So ultimately it is supposed to be experienced in very ultra high resolution. There's an IMAX type for it. You can go to some very high-end theaters where you could see the movie as the director intended, but obviously this is a joke for our industry. So for those who are unfamiliar, let's scroll down just a little bit. I was waiting for someone to finally do this. Again, people put all sorts of different things onto the PLC. Of course, this created a lot of comments and responses in our industry, but if you have the S7 1500 series PLC, obviously you know exactly what he's talking about. And if you have a different platform, so I've got also an Opto 22 behind me, in theory you could be playing videos in much higher resolution. But in any case, there's no other point to that specific comment. It was just extremely popular on the subreddit this week, so I wanted to give some context for those of you who maybe not have understood what was behind the image. The second post we're looking at this week is something that is very familiar to me, which is a very large-scale enterprise Rockwell automation build. And so if we switch over, we'll see that the username is showcasing a big PLC cabinet. If we click on the image, we can try and zoom in on certain parts. Again, the zoom in the native Reddit app is not the greatest, but we can clearly see that there is a control rack inside of this PLC system. And once again, we see a distributed and again, I like this build. I'll make a couple of comments on this front, but we also see a secondary ControlLogix chassis, and they come, if you've not worked with these before, in different sizes. The amount of slots you can put into them, they are fixed, meaning unlike the, for example, 1769 series where you can keep adding in theory indefinitely if you have a large enough panel. There's obviously some constraints in terms of what kind of IO and how you delimit them with power supplies. In this case, you buy two fixed racks that are going to have a set amount of ControlLogix IO points. I would have purchased the same racks because there's plenty of space inside of this panel to just scoot these elements over. But in any case, we have the PLC, and again, I believe that's the PLC that's sitting right there in the rack to the right hand side. We have a bunch of IO points, obviously digital, analog, very hard to tell from this image. Even if we zoomed in, there's not enough resolution. It's all broken down into the points down below. Very neat panel. We have an HMI also on the door. I believe, I would assume it is a PanelView series, probably 7 performance, because it's connecting to a fairly large system and maybe multiple systems. But we also have what seems to be power supplies here on the right hand side. There might be, I'm not seeing a switch, which is a little bit surprising for a panel of this size, but it's possible that the only PLC is really this one, and so one port would probably go to the rack over here for an Ethernet IP-based card, and the other one is going to the plant network, and there's simply not a need for a switch in this specific cabinet. There's nothing else really to say about the general state of the cabinet. This is really good work. We can see some labels, of course, on the devices. I, again, am squinting to try and see. I believe these are fuse blocks, not necessarily relays. We have the standard breakout for the ControlLogix chassis, which makes it easier to wire in the field. You can land your cables from the sensors and field devices on the right hand side here. So again, really nice cabinet. I'm assuming it's going to have a lot of holes drilled into it once it gets to the plant, unless that is the in-feed where it comes in. Surprised not to see some kind of a cooling system. Again, there's not a whole lot in terms of hardware. There's no VFDs, so maybe it's not needed, but something that I typically see in these installations.
Hi, my name is Vladimir Romanov. I am the founder of Joltek as well as Solus PLC. With a background in electrical engineering and MBA and over a decade of experience leading projects in manufacturing and industrial automation, I help engineers, managers, and manufacturers make smarter technical and business decisions, modernize their operations, and build stronger careers. If you're serious about manufacturing, automation, and staying ahead in the industry, subscribe and join the community.
We're looking at a lot of different electrical panels this week, which is interesting to say the least. A lot of times we have a different set of questions that are the most upvoted, but it seems like the trend continues. And so in this case, we have a question from the username Egg Sandwich, and he says, "The hell is this? Sorry, people, I'm an outsider. I've acquired a couple of cabinets like this and was wondering what it is exactly. How far off is this thing from making stepper motors chooch?" So we're going to click on the image, and we see an electrical panel which seems to have been dismantled for a couple of reasons from its original state. We see some of the cabling down here has been disconnected. I would assume there were a lot of terminal blocks. Why they were disconnected, or I guess what the state of the external I/O is, unclear. We see some ventilation, again, properly going from bottom to the top or top to bottom, depending on the airflow. We have some good grounding at the bottom, nothing to say on that front. So what he's referring to in terms of stepper motors or servo motors, depending on how you label them, are these Festo drives. So I've actually made a couple of videos on the Solus PLC YouTube channel because a couple of years ago, Festo had sent some of these drives for me to investigate and make some comments on. And these drives are fairly easy to work with once you get the right software and systems in place. So what you will notice is that there's a bunch of wires that have been cut off from the output and the input side of the drives, and those are the inputs and outputs to and from the motors in the field. So I have a couple of them on the other side of my home lab. These two cables go to the motor. You have two cables that are the 24-volt power supply, and you have an Ethernet based or Modbus based, or depending on the flavor that you have purchased. I believe this is Modbus. Again, the image is a little bit blurry, but you can communicate to these servo drives and devices very easily from a variety of different manufacturers of PLCs, which is exactly what Festo intended. And of course, they have their own brand of PLCs, which runs Codesys, if I'm not completely mistaken, but you can run this from Allen Bradley, which I have done on a CompactLogix as well as a ControlLogix without any issues. We obviously have more loose cable, but we have a panel which contains 10 of these different drives, and we see that the Ethernet comes in from the top. They're daisy chained. Again, we don't really know which flavor of PLCs are going to be used for this. We have some power supplies. I have not looked at the specific part number of this Siemens power supply. We also have some Weidmuller Pro Top power supplies, and we can see it's a very beefy power supply of 24 volts at 40 amps, which is feeding all of these units, as well as the attached servo/stepper motors. Once they are installed, of course, the cables have been cut off, so everything needs to be redone. I hate to see this. So this immediately tells me that a person that had absolutely no knowledge in electrical systems has removed this cabinet, because these terminal blocks are extremely easy to remove from the actual drive, but also by pressing with just a small screwdriver into these blue notches. And again, I can demonstrate this on my own drive, but this is the most fundamental or basic thing you could do as a technician or engineer. So obviously, whomever took this apart had no pride in their work. They simply cut off all of the cables, which means that the servo drives or the motors got shipped to maybe or sold to somebody else. They're going to have to re-terminate all of these wires. They're going to have to strip back the cable and remake all of it, which again is doable. It just added a ton of labor for absolutely no reason, where the terminals could have been very easily disconnected. So absolutely hate to see this. You can immediately tell who is selling you this equipment and who was the person that took this specific panel apart. We've got a next question slash comment from someone who has designed their first project in industrial automation in PLCs. And of course, we love to see these in our channels because people are ultimately excited about our industry, are bringing new solutions, and are driving industrial automation forward. So this comes from the username Muku610, my first PLC project. Hey all, thought I'd share my first ever PLC project with all of you. This is a prototype to replace my existing centralized low voltage lighting system touch plate in my house. I definitely need to work on my cable management for the final install, but I'm very happy I've gotten this far, even though I've got a long way to go. Any advice is appreciated. So let's click on the image and see what we've got here. So we have a very long DIN rail, which again, these come in different sizes, so I typically advise people to order just shorter versions. They're easier to work with, especially at home. But in any case, we have a few light sockets, and these are, again, depending on the region, either 110 or 220, which is why they are wired through relays. And these are finder relays that we have on the DIN rail, very common to see. I don't see the actual voltage. Again, the relay obviously closes whatever power is coming in. We also see the automation direct productivity series PLC, which is right there. And we have a couple of IO points. Again, I'm assuming all of this is digital IO unless I'm missing something, but we have different switches, which probably indicates that he's just reading the open and closed switch on either one of these buttons. It is a momentary signal which goes back into the input side, and then he's closing the relay, depending if it's normally open or normally closed, to run some of the lights as he described for his house application. On the bottom, of course, we have a Wago power supply, which is providing 5 amps for everything on the circuit. More than adequate. We see a couple of tools, so nothing extremely crazy. In terms of recommendations, advice, again, it seems like all of these components could have been placed on maybe a foot long of DIN rail, which would make the wiring a lot more manageable and easy to see. I don't see the need to run the long cabling to the relays, but again, that's maybe more of an aesthetic question than actual functionality. If you want to push this further, maybe there is some rationale to move this to a software called Home Assistant, which runs on Linux inside of Docker, and you can run this obviously connected to the PLC, but you can also tie this into, let's say, an app you install on your phone or just a web application through which you can remote into the system and make it a lot easier. So I guess to summarize, what I would say is, again, if you want to push this a little bit further, not only just on the PLC side, but also in terms of automation and other applications on the IT side, Home Assistant is definitely something to look into. The next post is a flashback into a piece of history of our industry. And those of you who have followed me for a little bit of time know that I've only graduated, and I say only, it's been over a decade now, but in 2013. And of course, in 2013, the latest and greatest on, at least on the Rockwell side, has already been ControlLogix and the advanced series of even CompactLogix PLCs That being said, a lot of my work still remains with PLC 5s, with older microcontroller series, with slicks, different versions, right, from 501s to 505s, depending on the nature of the factory, with Data Highway Plus, DeviceNet, ControlNet. So a lot of older protocols that are still running plants today. That being said, we do have a post from the user Milton Drives Way Signal, and he managed to score some PLCs from the PLC 5 era, which is very cool. I personally have a rack of a PLC 5 in my parents' house that I have dismantled and stored there for now. It is very difficult or expensive, I would say, to transport or ship that hardware, as all of you or many of you know how much it weighs. So it's really cool to see that he managed to get one of or two of the trainers that you originally would be trained on with PLC 5s. And like I said, I have not been trained on PLC 5s. I have been trained on ControlLogix type of systems. But of course, I have learned PLC 5s as well as RSLogix 5 as a result of supporting a lot of equipment that still runs on them. So this is a very cool find. We can still see the parallel port on the side of the PLC. For those of you who have not been exposed to this type of a system, we see some missing connectors, so hopefully he's able to connect via this RS485 port to this specific rack. But this is great. It looks like it powers on. There is a green light, so everything is working as expected. We can, of course, look at the images individually and see that all of the hardware seems to be at least in good shape based on the boot sequence. Once he gets connected and is able to communicate with them, we'll get more updates hopefully. And the username says, wasn't expecting to buy these, but I saw the listing and knew exactly what they were. Anyone who's gone into an AB PLC class will recognize these as the portable demonstration trainer units. Feeling very lucky to have these pieces of history. Can't wait to get set up and go online with them. Anyone have one of those golden floppies for RS Lynx 5? I'm sure I can find something out there. And this is, I would say, fortunate but also unfortunate in our industry. A lot of the times when the OEMs discontinue the hardware, they also pull the ability to download and even purchase the software. Again, I have multiple clients and factories that I know of that still utilize PLC 5s, slicks in various family ranges, and it is important for those who are in the field, who are working at those facilities, to have access to the software. So the fact that you cannot buy it anymore is a little bit unfortunate. And of course, if you go through the right channels, if you talk to the distributors, you can sometimes find your way to those licenses, but it is very much so difficult to get access. But this is absolutely amazing. I personally would love to purchase more PLC 5s and other PLCs of similar time range just for interest's sake. I love hardware, I love industrial automation, so having some of these pieces that actually work is absolutely amazing. The final question that we have this week is on the education side, but very much related to the industrial automation space. And so we have a user by the name Tanklin Janklin, and they say, what's actually needed? We have a photo and it says, a friend of mine is helping me learn automation. He gave me this board of his to practice on. It has two PLCs, a CompactLogix and a MicroLogix 850. And I have been using CCW Connected Components Workbench and Studio 5000. I'm worried I will go down the rabbit holes of learning things that are not necessary when starting out. So what should the top things to focus be? Ladder logic, HMI, Ethernet comms, any help is appreciated. So obviously we don't have more context if he's looking to land a job, if he's an electrician, if he's an engineer, if he's looking to focus more on PLCs and HMIs. That's the feeling at least that I'm getting. Or if he's looking to get into more SCADA and data type of things. But let's try and do our best to give him some advice. So first and foremost, we do have an unmanaged switch. This is a Stratix 2000. Again, there's not a whole lot we can do there. We have some terminal blocks. We have the circuit breakers. We have contactors that can be actuated by either PLC. We do have a CompactLogix, which is L38 ERM. Very good and very expensive model of a CompactLogix. So this is a 1769 series PLC, which includes motion as described by the last letter M at the very end. We do have a power supply. We do not have any I/O for this specific PLC, which means that there is not a whole lot you can do in terms of physical I/O, but of course you can practice programming in Studio 5000. On the other hand side, we have the Micro 850 series PLC, and I'm not as familiar with the exact part numbers that you see there. It's going to tell you what kind of inputs and outputs you have for your specific chassis. And I do have one of these PLCs sitting behind me. Again, those of you who are maybe looking at home, if you're listening to this, obviously you can't see it, but I have an example of one of these PLCs. So very familiar with the programming side of connected components workbench. So going back to what he currently does have is you can program and you can practice with CCW. There is a free version that you can download. You don't have the same availability to Studio 5000. Maybe he got a license, maybe he's got access some other way. That is not up to us to judge. I would focus, if you're looking to get into the industry, on Studio 5000. Studio 5000 is heavily utilized in our space. And of course, in large enterprise, it is the platform of choice. I have seen some smaller skids utilize the Micro 850, and there's going to be different families of controllers that can be utilized with CCW, but very much so a smaller install base in my general opinion. The other thought is he's asking about HMI and everything else. So I would start by learning ladder logic, especially if you are in the North American region. I would then focus on learning FactoryTalk View ME, which once again you need to have access to the license, but will allow you to simulate a lot of the push buttons, a lot of the sensors, will allow you to maybe create some scales, and you don't need to have the actual HMI. You can design those screens and connect to your CompactLogix PLC or the Micro 850 to then communicate from your laptop running instance of FactoryTalk View ME to the PLC. So you can accomplish quite a bit on that side. What I would also recommend, and again, I would say this is a little bit extra once you start it in the field, assuming that he's not already working in automation, you should be starting to learn ignition. And ignition is an HMI, it's a SCADA, it's a historian, it's an MES. They have a full free inductive university, which you can learn at your own pace, but you can also create some data capture. You can start simulating interesting processes via ignition, and you can push your learning forward. This will also enable you to start thinking about Ethernet communication. You will start learning about different protocols, whether that's MQTT, OPC, UA, or DA, depending on how you're connected. You will also be deploying applications, and you can run ignition on your laptop for all intents and purposes with a fully free license. Again, I don't get any commission for selling ignition. I just think it's a good natural progression once you have learned PLC, HMI, and then you're in this SCADA slash data slash visualization type of a platform. So I hope all of that helps. If you have any other questions, if you have any other topics you would like to discuss, if you disagree with some of my comments, please leave me a note. Feel free to reach out to me on YouTube. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to discuss industrial automation, manufacturing, operational excellence, and all of the surrounding topics. In any case, I'll see you all next week, and have a good weekend.